Joining us now in studio to discuss the war is the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressmember Adam Schiff. Representative Schiff, thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you.
So difficult times. This week, your House Intelligence Committee sent a bipartisan letter to the Director of National Intelligence. And in that letter, you encouraged her to, one, continue providing intelligence to Ukraine and its allies, but you also asked for a declassification of information, quote, related to Russia's planned or actual war crimes or atrocities. What are you hoping for in that declassified information?
The administration has used intelligence declassification in really important ways. First, by disclosing intelligence before the war to put Ukraine and the rest of the world on notice of what the Russians were planning. That helped us build support for sanctions. And then disclosing intelligence about Russian false flag operations, their potential use of chemical weapons. Also told the Russians, we know what you're planning. And finally now, to use our intelligence to help build the case on war crimes could be another really important use. If we can declassify information showing the deliberate attack of civilians, then some of these war criminals can be held accountable.
And so to that, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said this week that the government, the U.S. government, has now determined that some members of the Russian military have committed war crimes. What does that designation mean?
Well, it means that they can be held personally liable by an international criminal court or other tribunal. It would expose them to sanctions, for example, under the Magnitsky Act, where they can face financial sanctions, travel sanctions, and other costs of their war crimes. And ultimately, if the evidence goes back to Putin ordering indiscriminate bombing and other war crimes, he can also be held responsible.
What do you think of that? Do you think that President Vladimir Putin has committed war crimes?
I do. I think he's a war criminal and has blood on his hands. No one is more responsible for what's going on in Ukraine than he is. This is just naked aggression on his part, his desire to be the next Peter the Great. And the fact is that he has just no respect for human life.
There's also now very credible evidence from the intelligence community that Russians may be planning to use chemical weapons in this war against Ukraine. And President Joe Biden said this week that if that happens, that the U.S. would respond in kind. And I'm curious about your thoughts on this, about the U.S. perhaps not directly deploying chemical weapons ourselves, but assisting another country to engage in chemical warfare. Do you have any qualms about that?
Well, I heard the president make those remarks, and my immediate reaction was, I'm sure that he doesn't mean that we're going to respond with the use of chemical weapons or by supporting Ukraine's use of chemical weapons, which it doesn't possess to begin with. I think what he means is we'll respond proportionately. That is, we'll figure out in what other way, in a very severe terms, that we can help Ukraine respond, that we can respond with economic and other sanctions. And the president now is discussing with NATO what those repercussions should be. The Russians have used chemical weapons in peacetime. They poisoned people on foreign soil. They assisted Bashar al-Assad when he used chemical weapons. They're obviously not averse to doing it, and tragically, we have to be prepared.
Apart from that sort of warfare, what sort of assistance should we still be offering? President Biden has said over and over again that we're not going to be helping to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine. We had former Senator Barbara Boxer on the show not long ago, and she said, if we put U.S. military boots on the ground in Ukraine, we're essentially going into World War III. So beyond the humanitarian assistance that we've offered so far, beyond the military assistance that we've offered so far, what else could America still be doing?
I think we can do a lot more of what we have been doing. So we've been providing anti-tank and anti-armored vehicle munitions like the Javelins. We've been providing anti-aircraft weapons and systems. We've started providing armed drones. Those can be very effective. What the Ukrainians most need are things that they don't need to be extensively trained on, that they can make immediate use of. I would still love to see them get those Polish MiGs. But I think the president is right to draw the line on a no-fly zone, because I think that would get us into a shooting war with Russia. In order to impose a no-fly zone, we'd have to shoot down Russian aircraft. We'd have to shoot down air defense systems within Russia, and that would be a dramatic escalation.
I know you've also spent some time in the Ukraine yourself, so I'm sure personally this is hard to see on an extra level.
It is. I've been there a couple of times. I was there during their Revolution of Dignity, the Orange Revolution, when they were seeking to throw out a pro-Kremlin autocrat and ultimately succeeded. I have a lot of respect for the Ukrainian people.
So turning to politics here, recently the Washington Post reported that House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said he would strip you of your post as chair of the House Intelligence Committee should the Republicans regain a majority in the midterms. He's accused you of politicizing the panel. I am guessing you have a thing or two to say about that.
Yes, that's pretty rich coming from the guy who appointed Devin Nunes to the panel. And also pushed for the creation of a Benghazi Select Committee because he said he wanted to take down Hillary's numbers, poll numbers, that is. There's no one who's, I think, been more destructively partisan and political than Kevin McCarthy. But what he's doing when he threatens to remove me from the Intel Committee is seeking to appease the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Paul Gosars, who for good reason had their committees stripped aside for their support of white nationalism, for their advocacy, and a glorification of violence against other members of Congress. This is his way of saying, I'm going to do payback
sort of a tit for tat.
Yes, and also it reflects how weak a hold he has on the Republican conference, that he has to do the bidding of his most extreme members. Let's
turn to another piece of news you made. You took aim this week at the Citizens United decision. So this was back in 2010, a Supreme Court case in which the justices ruled that corporations and unions were permitted to give unlimited campaign contributions to run campaigns because it was an expression of free speech. But that has led to a lot of money sloshing around in the system over the last several years. Your amendment would essentially overturn Citizens United in that decision. Could you tell us about the amendment and what it would do?
As you say, it would do a couple things. It would overturn Citizens United, but it would go back to a case really 3 or 4 decades ago, a post-Watergate case where the Supreme Court struck down Watergate reforms that limited independent expenditures. Citizens United made that far worse. So this would overturn that line of decisions to allow Congress once again to put limits on expenditures of money, get rid of all the dark money, big corporate spending in elections. I think it's probably the most important constitutional reform we can have, is attacking that pollution of our campaign system.
Congressmember Adam Schiff, thank you for joining us here in studio today.
Pleasure.